You did not arrive here by accident. There is a reason this message found you now. Not yesterday, not years ago, but at this exact point in your timeline, something in your reality has started to feel different. Maybe the same situations are repeating, but they no longer feel as solid. Maybe the people around you are acting like mirrors, showing you patterns you used to ignore. Maybe you have noticed that when your inner state shifts, even slightly, the world outside you begins to respond in ways you cannot fully explain. And that is where the observer effect begins to touch your life. Not as a cold scientific theory, not as an abstract idea locked inside a laboratory, but as a living truth moving through your consciousness right now, because you are not simply watching your reality from the outside, you are participating in the way it appears, the way it feels, the way it keeps repeating, and the way it finally begins to change. Think of your reality as a quantum mirror. This mirror does not only reflect what you say you want, it reflects what you are silently expecting. It reflects the identity you keep returning to. It reflects the fears you keep checking for, the memories you keep using as proof, and the version of yourself you keep unconsciously defending. This is why two people can stand in the same room, hear the same words, face the same moment, and experience two completely different realities. They are not just seeing the moment, they are collapsing it through different inner worlds. And maybe that is what has been happening to you. Maybe life has not been trying to punish you. Maybe the universe has not been withholding your breakthrough. Maybe reality has been showing you, again and again, the exact place where your attention, your belief, and your old identity are still locked together. The repeating relationship, the repeating disappointment, the repeating delay, the repeating fear that says, "This always happens to me." Those moments are not random. They are signals. They are invitations. They are the mirror saying, "Look closer." There is a hidden observer inside you still choosing from the past. But here is the part most people miss. You do not change reality by forcing the mirror to smile. You do not shift timelines by pretending you are not afraid. You do not break an old loop by hating the version of you who created it. The hidden key is not control. The hidden key is observation. Not passive observation. Not the kind where you sit back and accept everything as fate, but awake observation, coherent observation, the kind of observation that notices the old script without becoming it again. Because the moment you can observe a pattern, you are no longer fully trapped inside it. That moment may look small from the outside. A breath, a pause, a decision not to react like before, a quiet realization that says, "Wait, this is the old version of me trying to choose again." But in the quantum field of your life, that moment is enormous. It is the first crack in the invisible script. It is the first time the old timeline does not receive your full agreement. It is the first time reality feels you withdrawing your energy from the loop. And when the observer changes, everything begins to reorganize. This video is not here to tell you that your thoughts magically control every event around you. It is here to show you something deeper, more powerful, and more liberating. Your state of observation influences what you notice, what you expect, what you choose, what you tolerate, what you repeat, and what you finally allow to dissolve. The observer effect changes everything because the observer is not separate from the reality being experienced. You are not just asking for a new reality. You are being invited to become the version of yourself who can actually observe it, to receive it, and remain stable inside it. So as you listen, do not rush, do not try to force a breakthrough. Let these words move through the part of you that already knows the old way is ending. Somewhere within you, the mirror has already started to shift. Somewhere within you, the hidden key has already turned. And by the end of this journey, you may realize something irreversible. Reality was never only happening to you, it was also responding to the observer you believed you had to be. The first shock is this: you have never seen reality in a completely neutral way. You may believe you are simply looking at your life, your relationships, your opportunities, your delays, your disappointments, and your patterns exactly as they are. You may believe the world appears first, and then you respond to it. But something much deeper is happening underneath the surface. Before reality reaches your conscious mind, it passes through a field of memory, belief, emotion, identity, and expectation. This means you are not only seeing what is there, you are seeing what your inner world has been trained to recognize. This is why two people can experience the same conversation and walk away with two completely different realities. One person hears rejection, another hears honesty. One person feels abandoned, another feels redirected. One person sees delay as proof that life is against them, another sees delay as protection, preparation, or divine timing. The outer event may look similar, but the inner observer collapses it into a completely different meaning. And meaning is powerful, because the meaning you give to a moment becomes the reality you live inside. This is where the observer effect stops being only an idea and becomes personal. The act of observation is not passive. You are not a blank camera recording the world. You are a living field of consciousness, filtering every moment through what you already believe is possible, what you secretly fear will happen, and who you have decided you are allowed to become. So when you say, "This always happens to me," you are not just describing reality. You may be reinforcing the lens that keeps finding it. And this is the part that changes everything. Your eyes are not the only thing looking. Your identity is looking. The version of you who was disappointed is looking. The version of you who was betrayed is looking. The version of you who learned to expect struggle is looking. The version of you who decided love is unsafe. Money is difficult. Success is fragile. Or being seen as dangerous is still looking through your eyes, calling its old fear intuition. But it may not be intuition. It may be memory wearing a spiritual mask. It may be the old self trying to protect you by predicting the same pain again and again. And because it predicts it, it searches for it. Because it searches for it, it notices it faster. Because it notices it faster, it reacts to it. And because it reacts to it, reality begins to arrange itself around that reaction. This is not punishment. This is pattern. The observer inside you is not only watching life, it is selecting evidence. It is highlighting certain details and ignoring others. It is saying, "This matters. This proves something. This confirms what I already knew." And every time you accept that evidence, without questioning the observer behind it, you strengthen the identity that created the interpretation. This is why changing your thoughts for one day is not always enough, because you can repeat affirmations with your mouth while still observing life from the identity of someone who does not believe them. You can say, "I am worthy," but still scan every room for proof that you are not. You can say, "I am abundant," but still make every decision from the fear that there will never be enough. You can say, "I trust my timeline," but still panic the moment reality does not move on your schedule. The universe does not only respond to the words you speak, it responds to the observer you are being. And this is where reality collapse begins. In every moment, there are many possible interpretations, many possible responses, many possible timelines available to you. But the old observer does not see all of them. It sees the familiar one first. It sees the painful one first. It sees the one that matches the identity you have carried the longest. So instead of entering a new possibility, you collapse the moment back into the old pattern. Someone takes time to reply, and the old observer collapses the moment into abandonment. A door closes, and the old observer collapses the moment into failure. Someone gives feedback, and the old observer collapses the moment into rejection. Money slows down, and the old observer collapses the moment into scarcity. Silence appears, and the old observer collapses the moment into proof that nothing is changing. But what if none of those meanings were final? What if they were only the meanings chosen by an observer who had not yet realized it was free? This is why awareness is so powerful. Awareness gives you a second of space before collapse. It gives you one sacred pause where you can ask, "Am I seeing what is true? Or am I seeing what is familiar?" That question alone can interrupt an entire timeline. Because the moment you question the lens loses authority. you begin to realize that your reality has not only been shaped by what happened to you, it has been shaped by the identity that formed around what happened to you. And that identity became a filter. That filter became a pattern. That pattern became a timeline. And that timeline started to feel like fate. But it was never fate. It was an observed reality repeated so many times that it began to look permanent. This is the quantum mirror. It does not lie. But it also does not only reflect your surface desires. It reflects the state you keep returning to when no one is watching. It reflects the fear you still treat as truth. It reflects the expectation hidden beneath your prayers. It reflects the version of you that still believes the old story has authority over the next chapter. And that may sound intense, but it is actually liberating. Because if reality is reflecting the observer, then your power is not gone. It has only been unconscious. You do not need to fight every reflection. You do not need to chase every outcome. You do not need to panic every time the mirror shows you an old pattern. You only need to pause and ask, who inside me is observing this right now? Is it the wounded self, the abandoned self, the rejected self, the version of me that expects life to repeat? Or is it the awakened self, the coherent self, the self that can witness the old story without collapsing into it? That question is the beginning of your shift, because you do not see reality as it is. You see reality as you are, and when who you are begins to change, what you are able to see, receive, choose, and experience begins to change with you. There is a hidden script beneath many of your choices. You may call it personality, you may call it intuition, you may call it just the way I am, but often, what you are calling yourself is actually a pattern that has been rehearsed so many times, it learned how to speak in your voice. The observer loop begins when an old experience becomes an inner expectation. Something happened. You were rejected. You were ignored. You were disappointed. You were left waiting. You were made to feel unsafe, unseen, or not chosen. And because the moment hurt, your consciousness created a rule around it. It said, remember this. Watch for this. Do not let this happen again. At first, that rule may have protected you, but over time, protection can become a prison, because now, instead of entering each moment as something new, you enter it with an invisible script already running. You do not only meet people, you scan them. You do not only receive silence, you translate it. You do not only face delay, you interpret it as proof. Before life can reveal what it actually is, the old observer has already decided what it probably means. And once the meaning is chosen, the loop begins. You fear being rejected, so you start looking for rejection. You notice the smallest shift in tone, the shortest reply, the delayed message, the subtle distance. Your body tightens, your energy changes. You become guarded. Then, because you are guarded, the other person feels distance from you. They pull back, and when they pull back, you say, see, I knew it. This always happens. But what really happened? Did reality reject you first? Or did the old observer begin collapsing the moment into rejection before the full truth had arrived? This is the observer loop. It is not only that you believe something, then see it. It is that you see through the belief, react from the belief, create conditions around the belief, and then use the result as evidence that the belief was true all along. The loop becomes self-confirming. That is why it can feel so difficult to escape. It does not always look like a loop from the inside. It looks like common sense. It looks like discernment. It looks like I am just being realistic. But sometimes, realism is only old pain that has become fluent. The invisible script says, people leave. So you notice every possible sign of leaving. It says, success does not last. So you sabotage the moment things begin to grow. It says, money is never enough. So even abundance feels temporary and unsafe. It says, if I am truly seen, I will be judged. So you hide your gift. Then wonder why the world has not recognized you yet. This is how a timeline repeats. Not because you are weak, not because you are cursed, not because the universe has chosen one painful storyline and locked you inside it, A timeline repeats when the same observer keeps entering new moments with the same identity, the same expectations, the same emotional reflexes, and the same unconscious agreements. The scenery may change, the characters may change, the year may change, but the inner script stays the same. So the outcome feels strangely familiar. This is why the loop can feel like fate. Fate feels fixed, a loop feels familiar, and when something is familiar long enough, your nervous system can mistake it for truth. Even pain can feel safe if it is predictable. Even disappointment can feel normal if it confirms who you have been. Even chaos can feel like home if your body learned early that calmness was temporary. So when a new timeline begins to open, part of you may resist it, not because the new reality is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar. A healthy relationship may feel suspicious. A peaceful season may feel boring. A breakthrough may feel like pressure. A new opportunity may feel too good to trust. This is one of the most hidden ways the observer loop protects itself. It teaches you to call the unknown dangerous, even when the unknown is actually freedom. And this is the moment where most people return to the old script. They say they want change, but when change arrives without the old emotional flavor, they do not recognize it. They expect transformation to feel dramatic, intense, and instantly certain. But many real shifts feel quiet at first. They feel spacious. They feel unfamiliar. They feel like you no longer know who you are supposed to be. That emptiness is not failure. It is the gap where the old observer is losing control. But the loop will try to pull you back through reaction. Something will happen that looks similar to the past. Someone will speak in a tone that reminds you of an old wound. A plan will slow down. A door will not open immediately. And the old script will rise quickly, whispering, "Here we go again." This is the critical point, because if you agree too quickly, the loop restarts. But if you pause, something new becomes possible. The pause is where you stop feeding the script with automatic identity. You do not need to deny what you feel. You do not need to pretend you are above fear. You simply notice. A part of me is trying to make this moment mean what the past meant. That noticing is powerful. That noticing is the first crack in the holographic glass. The loop survives by remaining invisible. It needs you to believe that your reaction is the only possible reaction. It needs you to believe your interpretation is the whole truth. It needs you to believe the old identity is simply who you are. But the moment you see the script, you become more than the role written inside it. You are no longer only the abandoned one, the rejected one, the delayed one, or the unseen one. You are the awareness behind the pattern. And awareness is the doorway out. The loop was never stronger than you. It was only older than your awareness. Now that you can see it, you can interrupt it. But the loop does not survive on memory alone. It survives on your attention. Now you must understand something that changes the entire mechanism of reality. Your attention is not empty. It is not weak. It is not random. It is not just something happening inside your head while the world continues outside of you, untouched and separate. Your attention is a living current. It is the currency your consciousness spends inside the quantum field. Wherever it goes, energy follows. Wherever it stays, patterns strengthen. Wherever it returns again and again, a timeline begins to grow roots. This is why what you keep watching keeps growing. Not because one thought instantly creates your whole life. Not because you are being punished for having fear. Not because every passing worry is dangerous. But because repeated attention becomes emotional investment. Emotional investment becomes expectation. Expectation becomes reaction. Reaction becomes choice. And choice, repeated long enough, becomes a reality you start calling normal. So look carefully. What has your attention been feeding? Has it been feeding the version of you who is becoming free? Or has it been feeding the version of you still waiting for the same disappointment to return? This is the hidden power of observation. Your attention is like a quantum spotlight. When it lands on something, that possibility becomes brighter in your inner world. It gains weight. It gains detail. It begins to feel more real than the other possibilities around it. And once something feels real to you, Your nervous system begins preparing for it. Your body responds to it. Your choices bend around it. Your perception starts scanning for evidence that confirms it. This is why fear can be so convincing. Fear is not just an emotion. Fear is attention locked onto an unwanted timeline. When you fear abandonment, you do not simply dislike the possibility of being left. You begin watching for it. You listen for changes in tone. You measure the time between replies. You read silence as distance. You interpret someone's tiredness as withdrawal. And each time you do this, your quantum spotlight shines on the same probability: I am about to be left again. Then your body reacts as if it has already happened. You become tense. You become guarded. You become suspicious. You may ask for reassurance. But your energy is already preparing for loss. And because your energy changes, the relationship changes. The field changes. The moment becomes heavier. The person in front of you may not even know why they suddenly feel pressure, but they feel it. And then, the old timeline whispers, "See, I told you." This is how attention feeds a timeline. It does not always create events directly in a simple, linear way. It creates the internal climate where certain events become more likely to be noticed, repeated, invited, interpreted, and reinforced. The timeline you water becomes the timeline you walk. And most people are watering realities they say they do not want, simply because they cannot stop staring at them. This is why fear is also a form of devotion. That may sound intense, but feel the truth beneath it. Whatever you constantly return to in your mind receives your energy. Whatever you rehearse emotionally receives your life force. Whatever you check for, scan for, and brace against becomes a kind of altar inside your awareness. You may not love it. You may not want it. You may even be trying to escape it. But your attention is still kneeling before it. And the quantum field does not only read your desire, it reads your focus. It reads what you are giving reality permission to keep showing you through repeated observation. This does not mean you should shame yourself for fear. Fear is often the voice of a younger self trying to keep you safe. But you must stop letting fear choose what receives your sacred attention. You can comfort the fear without obeying its spotlight. You can hold the wounded part of you without letting it aim your consciousness back at the old timeline. This is where the shift becomes practical. Imagine your life as a garden of timelines. Every possibility is a seed. Some seeds are old. Some were planted by family patterns, past experiences, heartbreaks, losses, failures, or words you believed before you knew your own power. Other seeds are new. They represent peace, abundance, love, visibility, freedom, purpose, and the version of you that no longer lives as a reaction to pain. Both kinds of seeds may exist in the soil, but only the ones you water can grow. Your attention is the water. Your emotional repetition is the sunlight. Your identity is the climate. So if you keep saying, "Why is this old pattern still here?" the deeper question is, what part of me is still feeding it? Not blaming it, not attacking it, not hating yourself for it, just seeing clearly, because clarity is the beginning of power. You cannot starve an old timeline while secretly checking if it is still alive every hour. You cannot build a new reality while using all your attention to monitor the old one. At some point, you must stop treating the old pattern like the center of your universe. You must stop making every decision around whether it might come back. You must stop allowing the fear of repetition to become the very mechanism that repeats it. This is where many people misunderstand manifestation. They think attention means staring at what they want with desperation. They visualize, to affirm, and repeat words. But underneath those words is a nervous system still asking, "Is it here yet? Why is it not here yet? What if it never comes?" That is not coherent observation. That is fear dressed as focus. True attention is not obsession. True attention is devotion without panic. It is the calm, repeated placement of your awareness on the timeline you are choosing to inhabit. It is not begging the field to prove something. It is becoming steady enough that the new possibility can find a stable place inside you. Because a timeline cannot fully open through a consciousness that keeps abandoning it every time the old fear gets loud. Attention without identity shift is temporary. You can focus on abundance for 10 minutes. But if you still identify as someone who is always one step away from loss, scarcity will reclaim your field. You can focus on love for one day. But if you still identify as someone who must earn affection through anxiety, the old relational timeline will return. You can focus on success, healing, or freedom. But if the observer remains the same, the attention eventually bends back to familiar ground. So the question is not only, what am I focusing on? The deeper question is, who is focusing? Is it the old self trying to escape pain, or the new self calmly selecting possibility? Because when your attention comes from the old self, even your dreams can carry the frequency of desperation. But when your attention comes from the new observer, even a small thought becomes powerful. Even a quiet choice becomes a signal. Even one breath can tell the field, I am no longer feeding that timeline. This is how the shift begins. Not by fighting the old reality, not by fearing your fear, but by reclaiming your quantum spotlight and placing it, again and again, on the reality your awakened self is ready to walk. But the real secret is even deeper than attention. It is the self who is doing the observing. Now we arrive at the hidden truth, the part almost no one wants to look at. You may think you are observing your life from the present moment. You may think the one making decisions, reading signs, interpreting silence, judging opportunities, and predicting outcomes is the person you are now. But very often, the observer behind your eyes is not the present you at all. It is the old self. It is the version of you that learned to survive before it learned to trust. The version that had to become alert, careful, guarded, hyper-aware, and prepared for disappointment. The version that learned to read small changes in energy because once, those changes meant danger. The version that started predicting loss before loss could surprise you again. And here is the shock. That version of you may no longer exist in your outer life, but it may still be observing through your inner world. The old self is still borrowing your eyes. This is why you can be standing in a new season, surrounded by new possibilities, and still feel the same fear. This is why you can meet someone kind and still search for the hidden betrayal. This is why you can receive an opportunity and immediately prepare for it to disappear. This is why you can be offered peace. But your nervous system starts looking for the storm. The moment is new, but the observer is old. And when the observer is old, even a new reality gets translated through an expired identity. This is the deepest layer of the observer effect. It is not only that your attention changes what you experience, it is that the self who is paying attention determines what your attention is able to collapse. If the wounded self is observing, it will collapse possibility into protection. If the abandoned self is observing, it will collapse silence into rejection. If the betrayed self is observing, it will collapse uncertainty into suspicion. If the scarcity self is observing, it will collapse delay into proof that nothing is coming. The field may be offering you something new, but the old observer can only recognize what matches the past. This is why so many people say they want a new timeline, but unconsciously keep selecting the emotional evidence of the old one. They do not do this because they are weak. They do it because the old self still believes its job is to keep them alive. It does not care about expansion. It cares about familiarity. It does not care about your highest timeline. It cares about avoiding the pain it remembers. So when reality begins to shift, the old self often becomes louder. It says, "Do not trust this." It says, "You have seen this before." It says, "Do not get excited." It says, "Prepare for disappointment." It says, "This is too good to be real." And because that voice sounds protective, you may mistake it for wisdom. You may call it discernment. You may call it intuition. You may call it being realistic. But sometimes, what you call realism is only an old wound trying to remain in authority. True intuition feels clear. Old fear feels urgent. True intuition guides you without shrinking you. Old fear protects you by closing every door that requires trust. This is where the hidden quantum shift begins. Because the real shift is not forcing yourself to think differently. It is not pretending you are fearless. It is not covering an old wound with spiritual language and calling it healed. The real shift happens when you realize, with total honesty, I am not observing this moment from who I am now. I am observing it from who I had to become back then. That realization is not small. That realization is a rupture in the loop. Because the moment you can separate yourself from the old observer loses its position as the center of your reality. You begin to see that there is a difference between your awareness and your conditioning. There is a difference between your soul and your survival pattern. There is a difference between the truth of this moment and the story your old self is trying to place over it. This is the moment of quantum separation. For the first time, you do not become the fear immediately. You see it. You do not become the old reaction immediately. You witness it. You do not collapse the moment into the old timeline immediately. You pause, and in that pause, something extraordinary happens. The old self is still speaking, but you are no longer fully hypnotized by its voice. The old script is still available, but you are no longer automatically stepping into the role. The familiar emotional frequency still appears, but it no longer owns the whole field. This is how an identity begins to dissolve. Not through violence, not through self-rejection, not through hating who you were, but through witnessing the old self with so much presence that you no longer need to obey it. You do not have to destroy the old you. You have to stop letting it be the only observer. Because that old version of you was not wrong for existing. It protected you when you did not know how else to survive. It created strategies when you had no support. It built walls when your heart had no language for boundaries. It watched for danger because danger once felt real. It learned to expect less because hoping for more once hurt too much. So do not shame the old self. Thank it, but do not hand it the steering wheel. Do not let a version of you created in pain decide what love means now. Do not let a version of you created in scarcity decide what abundance means now. Do not let a version of you created in rejection decide whether you are worthy of being seen now. Do not let a version of you created in survival collapse your present moment into a prison that no longer exists. The reality you keep fighting may only be the shadow of a self you no longer are. Let that sentence enter deeply. The problem may not be that reality refuses to change. The problem may be that the old observer keeps selecting the same meaning from every new situation. The blessing arrives, but the old self questions it. The door opens, but the old self distrusts it. The relationship softens, but the old self prepares to be hurt. The opportunity expands, but the old self searches for what might go wrong. And because the old observer keeps interpreting new energy through old fear, the new timeline cannot stabilize. It flickers. You feel expansion for a moment, then contraction. You feel hope, then panic. You feel clarity, then doubt. You feel a new identity rising. Then the old one rushes in to reclaim the field. This does not mean you failed. It means two versions of you are no longer able to occupy the same inner throne. One must lead, and the one that leads is the one you identify with. That is why breaking the observer loop means withdrawing identity from the old script. You are not just changing thoughts. You are changing allegiance. You are no longer saying, I am abandoned. You are saying, a part of me learned abandonment, but I am the awareness that can hold that part without becoming it. You are no longer saying, I am always delayed. You are saying, a part of me fears delay, but I am no longer collapsing my future into that fear. You are no longer saying, this always happens to me. You are saying, this pattern is appearing, but I am not required to repeat it. That is quantum freedom. It is the ability to see an old probability without making it your identity. It is the ability to feel an old emotion without letting it select your timeline. It is the ability to remember the past without observing the present through its eyes. And when this happens, reality starts to feel different. Not always because everything changes instantly outside of you, but because the inner authority has shifted. The old self is no longer the unquestioned narrator. The old wound is no longer the interpreter of every silence. The old fear is no longer the judge of every possibility. A new observer has entered. This new observer does not need immediate proof to remain stable. It does not panic when reality takes a breath. It does not worship the old evidence. It does not confuse unfamiliar peace with danger. It can look at uncertainty and say, I do not know what this means yet, and I do not need to collapse it into fear. That sentence alone can change a timeline, because now, for the first time, the quantum field has space to show you something unfamiliar, something not built from your old expectation, something not chained to your old identity, something that could never appear while the old self was occupying the entire screen of your awareness. This is the hidden quantum shift. You do not change everything by obsessing over reality. You change everything by changing the observer reality is responding to. And once you truly see the old self as a chapter, not a prison, something irreversible begins. The past may still echo, but it no longer commands. The fear may still arise, but it no longer defines. The pattern may still knock, but you no longer have to open the door wearing the same identity. You are not here to prove the old story forever. You are here to become the living evidence that the observer can awaken, the loop can break, and the timeline can finally receive someone new. After the hidden truth is revealed, something inside you may want to rush. You may want to fix yourself immediately, change your thoughts instantly, correct every reaction, and force your reality to prove that you are finally different. But that urgency is often the old self, wearing a spiritual costume. It says, hurry, control everything, make the mirror change now. And if you obey that voice, you do not become the new observer. You only turn transformation into another form of pressure. So the first step is softer than you think. Stop trying to control the mirror. The quantum mirror does not respond to force in the way the old self hopes it will. You cannot stand in front of the mirror with panic in your body, desperation in your breath, fear in your chest, and demand that it reflect peace. You cannot keep gripping the old timeline with one hand while asking the new timeline to fully arrive in the other. Reality responds to the total signal, not the performance. This is why many people feel exhausted on the path of manifestation. They are trying to convince the universe of a state they have not allowed themselves to embody. They repeat the right words, but the body is still bracing. They visualize the outcome, but the nervous system is still preparing for disappointment. They say they trust the process, but their attention keeps checking whether the old pattern is still alive. That is not failure. That is incoherence. And incoherence simply means different parts of you are sending different signals. One part says, I am ready. Another part says, I am not safe. One part says, I trust. Another part says, I need proof first. One part reaches for the new reality. Another part keeps watching the old one, terrified it will return. The new observer is not born through self-attack. The new observer is born through coherence. Coherence is the moment your mind, heart, body, breath, and choice begin to face the same direction. Not perfectly, not permanently, not in some unreachable state of enlightenment, but honestly enough that your field stops fighting itself. Coherence is when your inner world says, I may not see the full evidence yet, but I am no longer giving my entire identity to the old story. This is stronger than desperation. Desperation screams at reality. Coherence speaks in a frequency reality can recognize. Desperation says, please change so I can feel safe. Coherence says, I am learning to feel safe enough to stop recreating what hurt me. Desperation chases proof. Coherence becomes proof. Desperation keeps asking the mirror, am I different? Yet coherence quietly decides, I will no longer abandon myself just because the reflection has not caught up. Feel the difference. One is rooted in lack. The other is rooted in return, to become the new observer. You do not need to deny the old self. You do not need to pretend you never feel fear, doubt, anger, grief, or uncertainty. You are not trying to become a polished spiritual image with no human reactions. You are becoming the awareness that can hold those reactions without letting them choose your timeline. This is the sacred difference. The old observer says, "I feel fear, so danger must be real." The new observer says, "I feel fear, so something in me is asking to be held before I choose." The old observer says, "This delay means nothing is working." The new observer says, "This delay is not enough evidence to collapse my future into defeat." The old observer says, "This silence means I am being rejected." The new observer says, "This silence is unknown, and I do not need to worship the old meaning." That is how you become new. Not by never feeling the old emotion, but by no longer letting the old emotion become the final interpreter of reality. Now take this into the body, because the body is where the timeline becomes believable. A new observer cannot live only in the mind. The mind can understand transformation quickly, but the body needs repetition. The body needs safety. The body needs proof through experience. Every time you pause instead of react, the body learns. Every time you breathe instead of collapse, the body learns. Every time you choose the new meaning instead of the familiar wound, the body learns. So practice this now, not later. Now, take one slow breath in. On the first breath, simply notice the loop. Do not judge it. Do not fight it. Say inwardly, "I see the old pattern." Let that be enough. The moment you see it, you are already more than it. Take a second breath in. On this breath, gently name the old observer. Maybe it is the rejected self. Maybe it is the abandoned self. Maybe it is the scarcity self. Maybe it is the version of you who learned to expect disappointment before hope could hurt again. Say inwardly, "I honor the part of me that tried to protect me." Now take a third breath in. On this breath, place your hand over your chest and say, slowly, "I observe from the self I am becoming, not the self I survived." Let the words land in your body. Do not rush past them. Let your nervous system hear that it is not being forced into a new identity. It is being invited into one. This is frequency collapse. Not dramatic. Not loud. Not something you need to perform for anyone. A simple, quiet withdrawal of energy from the old observer and a gentle return to the new one. This is how the field begins to reorganize. This is how the mirror begins receiving a different signal. This is how reality starts to feel that the one observing it is no longer the same. And you must repeat this, because the old observer was built through repetition, and the new observer is stabilized through repetition too. One breath will open the door. One choice will create the crack. One pause will interrupt the loop. But repetition teaches the timeline that you are serious. Repetition tells the body, this is not a temporary performance. This is who we are becoming now. Every time you do not answer from the wound, you become the new observer. Every time you do not chase from fear, you become the new observer. Every time you let uncertainty remain open, instead of forcing it into an old meaning, you become the new observer, and slowly, reality begins to meet someone it has never fully met before. Not the self who begs, not the self who braces, not the self who collapses every possibility into pain, but the coherent one, the steady one, the one who can stand before the mirror and no longer demand that it change first. Because now you understand. You are not waiting for reality to prove you are new. You are becoming new. And reality is learning how to reflect you. Now the shift becomes visible in the place most people overlook: your reaction. Not your vision board. Not your affirmation. Not the words you say when you feel calm and spiritual. Your reaction is where the observer reveals which timeline it still believes is real. Because when life touches an old wound, the body answers before the mind can perform. This is why reactions matter so deeply. A reaction is not just a response to what happened. It is a vote. It is consciousness saying, this is the reality I agree with. Every time you react from the same fear, the same panic, the same defense, the same expectation of disappointment, you vote for the old timeline to continue. Think about it. Someone speaks in a tone that reminds you of the past, and within seconds your field contracts. Before you know what they truly meant, you have already entered protection. Your face changes. Your voice changes. Your energy pulls back. You may still be physically present, but internally you have stepped into a timeline where the old story has already won. And then reality feels different because you are different inside it. The room may be the same. The person may be the same. The moment may still be open. But your reaction has narrowed the field. It has taken a living possibility and collapsed it into a familiar meaning. This is not failure. This is the old observer trying to protect its throne. This is why the pause is so powerful. The pause is the portal. Between the stimulus and the reaction, there is a quantum gap. It may last only one breath. It may feel tiny, almost invisible, but inside that gap, your future is not yet decided. The old self has not fully taken over. The old meaning has not fully hardened. The old timeline has not fully received your agreement. In that gap, you do not need to become a different person instantly. You only need to not abandon the new observer. You only need to breathe before you confirm the ancient fear. You only need to say, silently, "This looks familiar, but I do not know yet what it means." That sentence creates space. Space creates choice. Choice creates a new collapse. Most people keep recreating the old reality because they never reach the gap consciously. They move from trigger to reaction so quickly that they mistake the reaction for truth. They say, "I had no choice. That is just how I felt." But feeling is not always final reality. Sometimes feeling is an echo. Sometimes it is the body replaying yesterday inside today. This is where embodiment becomes essential. The mind can understand the new timeline in a moment, but the body needs to feel that it can survive a new response. If your body has spent years preparing for conflict, peace may feel unsafe. If your system learned to chase love, stillness may feel like loss. If scarcity taught you to brace, receiving may feel suspicious. So be gentle with the body. But do not let it drive from the wound. Put one hand on your chest. Feel the contraction. Say inwardly, "I understand why you are afraid." But we are not choosing from fear anymore. This is not denial. This is leadership. The awakened self does not shame the nervous system. It teaches the nervous system a new truth through repeated safety. Every time you pause, you teach the body that a trigger is not a command. Every time you breathe, you teach the field that urgency is not your master. Every time you refuse to make a familiar wound the final meaning, you withdraw your vote from the old timeline. This is how reality begins to change from the inside outward. You may not see proof immediately. The outer world often lags behind the inner decision. The mirror may still show yesterday for a while. People may still expect the old version of you. Circumstances may still carry momentum from previous choices. Do not panic. Momentum is not destiny. A delayed reflection is not a failed shift. Proof appears after alignment, not before. This is one of the hardest truths to accept because the old self wants evidence first. It says, "Show me the change, and then I will believe." But the new observer says, "I will stop using the absence of proof as permission to become the old me again." That is a powerful declaration. It tells the quantum field that your identity is no longer rented from circumstances. It tells your body that safety is no longer dependent on immediate confirmation. It tells the old loop that you are not available to be hypnotized by the same evidence anymore. And it tells the new timeline, "I can hold you even before you fully appear." This is the difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is old energy moving fast. Response is awakened awareness, moving with choice. Reaction closes possibility. Response keeps the field open. Reaction says, "I know exactly what this means because I have been hurt before." Response says, "I have been hurt before, but I am not required to turn this moment into a copy of that wound." That is timeline liberation in real time. Not later. Not when everything is perfect. Not when your past is completely forgotten. Right in the moment where the old self reaches for the steering wheel and you gently say, "No, I see you. I honor you. But I am driving from the awakened self now." And as you do this, your reality begins receiving a different instruction. Your presence changes. Your voice softens or strengthens without fear. Your choices become cleaner. Your boundaries become less dramatic and more true. You stop chasing what needs to leave. You stop rejecting what wants to arrive. You stop making the old pattern the center of every prayer. Then something beautiful happens. Life may still test the old doorway, but you no longer open it the same way. The loop knocks, and the new observer answers. The past echoes, and the new observer listens without surrendering. And when one person stops confirming the old timeline, the field around them begins to change. This shift does not end with you. It starts touching every life near yours. Now the shift expands beyond you. When you stop observing life through the old wound, you do not only free your own timeline, you change the frequency you carry into every room, every conversation, every relationship, and every silent moment where someone else unconsciously asks, "Is change really possible?" Your presence becomes an answer before your words arrive. This is the greatest hope of the observer effect. A new observer does not live in isolation. Your coherence becomes part of the field. Your healing becomes information. Your refusal to repeat the old script becomes a signal that others can feel, even if they cannot explain it. Think about the people around you. Some of them have only known you as the version who over-explained, overgave, over-feared, overweighted, or overprotected. They expected you to react from the same place because that was the role the old timeline assigned to you. But when you no longer perform that role, something in the shared field changes. The invisible agreement breaks. You stop feeding the same emotional pattern, and suddenly the other person has nothing familiar to push against. They may resist it at first. They may test whether the old you is still available. They may try to pull you back into the old script because your change forces them to meet a version of you they did not prepare for. But stay coherent, because your awakening is not aggressive. It is not about proving superiority. It is not about becoming untouchable or cold. It is about becoming so rooted in your new observer that the old pattern can no longer use your energy to survive. This is how collective awakening begins. Not through noise, through coherence. One person stops reacting from fear, and a family line receives a new possibility. One person stops confusing love with anxiety, and a relationship field begins to soften. One person stops calling scarcity identity, and an entire lineage feels a different permission. One person chooses the pause instead of the wound, and the field remembers that another timeline exists. This is morphic resonance. The courage to become becomes contagious. When you embody a new reality, you create a permission field for others. You show them, without forcing them, that identity is not a prison. You show them that the past can echo without ruling. You show them that peace can be chosen before proof arrives. And for someone watching silently, your transformation may become the first crack in their own invisible script. So do not underestimate your private shift. The breath you take before reacting matters. The boundary you hold without guilt matters. The old fear you witness without obeying matters. These are not small things. They are quantum signals entering the human field. You are not only manifesting a better outcome, you are becoming living evidence that the observer can awaken. The loop can break, and reality can respond to a consciousness that finally remembers its power. Now you understand why the observer effect changes everything. It was never only about thinking better thoughts, saying stronger affirmations, or trying to command the universe from a place of fear. It was about the observer behind the thought. It was about the identity choosing what to notice, what to expect, what to fear, what to repeat, and what to finally release. Your reality has not simply been happening around you, it has been interacting with the version of you that kept showing up to observe it, interpret it, and give it meaning every single day. You learned that you do not see reality exactly as it is. You see it through the lens of the self you have accepted as true. If that self was built from rejection, you saw rejection everywhere. If that self was built from scarcity, even blessings felt temporary. If that self was built from survival, peace felt suspicious. But once you saw the lens lost its power to pretend it was the whole truth. That recognition alone changed the field. Because awareness is the first place where the old reality begins to soften. You learned about the observer loop, the invisible cycle where old expectations keep recreating old experiences. The loop survived because it felt familiar. It survived because your nervous system mistook repetition for safety. It survived because the old script spoke in your voice and convinced you it was wisdom. But now you have seen the script. You have seen how fear observes, how fear reacts, and how fear uses the result as proof that it was right all along. Once a loop becomes visible, it is no longer your master. It becomes a pattern you can interrupt. You learned that your attention is a quantum spotlight. What you keep watching, checking, fearing, rehearsing, and emotionally feeding becomes heavier in your field. This does not mean you should shame yourself for fear. It means you must reclaim your sacred attention from timelines you no longer choose to water. Fear may knock, but it does not get to hold the light. The old possibility may appear, but it does not get to become your altar. You are learning to place your awareness where your highest self can breathe, grow, and finally become stable within you. Then you saw the deeper truth. The one observing may not have been the present you. It may have been the old self borrowing your eyes. The abandoned self, the rejected self, the scarcity self, the version that survived something painful and then tried to protect you by predicting pain everywhere. But now you know the difference between your awareness and your conditioning. You can honor the old self without letting it lead. You can remember the past without observing the present through its wound. That separation is the hidden quantum shift. That is where freedom begins. And you learned how to become the new observer without forcing reality, not through panic, not through desperation, not through spiritual performance, through coherence, through the calm return of your mind, heart, body, breath, and choice into one clear signal. You practiced the 3 breaths. You saw the old pattern. You honored the protector within you. Then you declared, I observe from the self I am becoming, not the self I survived. That simple act is not small. It is a frequency collapse. It tells the old timeline that your full agreement has been withdrawn. You learned that reality changes when your reactions stop confirming the old timeline. Every reaction is a vote. Every pause is a portal. Every breath before collapse is a doorway into a different future. When the old wound rises and you do not obey it, something changes. When silence appears and you do not call it rejection, something changes. When delay appears and you do not call it defeat, something changes. The field receives a new instruction. The mirror may take time to adjust, but the observer has already changed. And that is the true beginning. And finally, you saw that your awakening is not only personal. When one observer changes, the field around them changes. Your coherence becomes permission. Your healing becomes information. Your refusal to repeat the old script becomes a signal that touches family lines, relationships, friendships, communities, and silent strangers who feel something different in your presence. You do not have to force anyone to awaken. You become living proof that the loop can break. You become a doorway. You become a reminder that identity is not a prison, and reality is not as fixed as fear once claimed. So now, before this journey closes, place one hand over your chest if you feel called. Take one slow breath. Let the old story rise without becoming it. Let the old fear speak without giving it the throne. Let the old timeline appear without handing it your future. And say this inwardly: I no longer observe from the old loop. I no longer collapse my reality through fear. I observe from my highest timeline now. I am coherent with the self I am becoming. The mirror has changed because I have changed. Let those words enter your body. If this message reached the part of you that was ready, write this declaration in the comments. The mirror has changed, not as empty words, as a signal, as a commitment, as a mark in the field that says the old observer is no longer leading your life. From this moment forward, you do not need to chase proof. You do not need to beg the reflection. You do not need to become the wound again. Reality was never only happening to you, it was responding to who you believed you had to be. And now, you remember.